Well, in September of 1974, a Langenburg area farmer, Edwin Furr, saw something he could not explain. He says 5 UFOs hovered over the field he was swathing. His story has not changed over the years.
And I thought to myself, what the devil is that contraption anyway? Because they weren't on the ground, they were off the ground. They were about a foot off the ground. And they were sitting there going around the circle.
He said the saucer-shaped machines flew away, leaving behind crop circles. At the time, this was big news. People traveled from all over to come and see the crop circles. And now, 50 years later, the Royal Canadian Mint has issued a coin commemorating Saskatchewan's most famous UFO incident. It's the 7th coin in a series of paranormal coins produced by the Mint. And it's triggering some big memories for people who lived through it. So today on the show, we'll revisit this intriguing case. We'll hear from the farmer who witnessed these strange objects. We'll speak to the RCMP officer who investigated the case. And we'll talk to a Canadian researcher who's looked at UFOs and close encounters. We also want to hear from you today. What do you remember from this UFO incident in Langenburg 50 years ago? Did something like this happen in your community? Have you seen something in the sky that you just can't explain? Call us at 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. Well, we did reach out to Edwin Furr. We spoke with his wife, who says he's now 86 years old and doesn't do interviews anymore. But over the years, many people have spoken to Edwin about what he claims he saw. There's a video on YouTube that was posted on March 14th, 2017, where Edwin recounts his experience.
This was about maybe 7 o'clock in the morning when I got up. And Dad said, or my brother phoned me from his farm, and he told me, you better swath all that canola down before it freezes up. So that's what I did. I went out to cut the canola. I went to the east end of the field, because the field was opened up the night before. There was rounds made around the field, but this was, I had to go to the east end and finish that little corner off. So on the way down, I cut the field in half and went right down the center, where that big slough is sitting there. And coming upon the slough, I come across these dome-shaped objects in the field, and I didn't know what the hell they were, but somebody told me that American hunters use these for hunting geese, so I never thought too much of it, driving to the slough with the swather. So I got a little closer and I stopped, because everything was moving. I thought, well, gee, goose blinds don't move. They sit still. So I thought to myself, well, I might as well get off to see what this contraption is. So I got off on the ladder side of the swather and I walked towards him, and I stopped about roughly 15 feet away from the object, because I could see right underneath through it to the bottom. The grass was moving, and I thought to myself, what the devil is that contraption anyway? Because they weren't on the ground, they were off the ground. They were about a foot off the ground. And they were sitting there going around the circle. They weren't standing stationary. I thought the machine was stationary, and it wasn't. It was going counterclockwise. The grass was going one way, and the machine was going the other way. So I walked a little closer. I wanted to really see what it was, but it was moving. And instinct told me to back up. So I backed up to stand about at least 15 feet away from him. And I thought to myself, well, that's kind of odd. It's going the opposite way. It's going counterclockwise. It's not going clockwise. It's going counterclockwise. Grass was moving one way and the machine was going the other way. And I thought, well, that's kind of weird. I thought, well, I wonder who the hell it is. Some joker probably playing a trick on me. And I was going to walk a little closer. Instinct told me to keep my distance. So I kept my distance, and I walked around and looked at it. What the devil? There's another one on the other side. There were 3 in a row. One on the south side, about maybe 100 feet away. Another one on the north side, 100 feet away. And there was 3 in the center. All 5 machines. There was 2 on the end there. The 2 little ones were guarding the 3 big ones in the center. And it was sitting in a half-moon shape.
Well, CBC went out to Langenburg this week and spoke with Edwin's brother, Leo. Leo went out and saw the crop circles in 1974.
My wife and myself, we came from over where I live right now, and we were shocked because the imprints were there, and they were about 8 feet in diameter, and they were like a donut, and the grass was swept one way, and the center part was like the center of a donut. So definitely there was something spinning in that grass, and there was 5 imprints there that were on the far east side of that slough, and they were as plain as day, and a lot of people witnessed it. So the thing is, my sister, well, she's passed away since, but she's got photos of it, and the RCMP came out and they verified it, that yes, there was something definitely there.
And what was your first reaction when you came here in the morning?
Well, I was surprised. I thought, well, what the heck, maybe my brother was seeing things and that, but until I saw the rings, seeing is believing. So the thing is, there definitely something was there. And the thing is, being that the grass was spun in the same direction, all 5 of them, there was definitely something spinning. And like he said, then eventually they took off with a sort of a vapor underneath them. So yeah, I mean, it definitely, the signs were there. And apparently, I think it was that night, a day later, in the evening, apparently we went out and there was a stone pile right over there. And apparently one more had coming back, or whether it was there, that we didn't notice it. So there was another imprint over by the stone pile there. So it's hard to believe, like you have to wonder about it. And so it definitely was either these flying saucers or whatever. I mean, whatever they are, and like UFOs. I mean, there's lots of talk about it, and a lot of people think it's just a hoax. And seeing it, I don't think it's a hoax. It was definitely something was down there in the grass.
Leo says after he witnessed the crop circles with his own eyes, he believed. But Leo says his brother Edwin was afraid to tell people what he saw. And so Edwin left the field and headed straight home. And that's where he picks up the story.
They were gone in just a week of them. You wait till you would have missed them. So then the swather started. And I thought, thank God. It took off, and I didn't stop. I went straight for the house. And my mother said, well, what the devil took you so long? Dinner time's at 12 o'clock, And I didn't know how to tell her this. Well, I said I was sort of watching something in a slough, not too far from the house. And Dad was reading the newspaper at the other end of the room. We had, the house was, there was a breakfast nook on the far end, and that's where he was sitting reading the newspaper. And he looks at me and says, what was it? Well, I sort of didn't want to tell him. I was sort of nervous. And then I told him. I said it was some kind of object from I don't know where, but they're not there no more. Well, what happened to them? I said, they took off. Well, where did they go? I says, how the hell would I know? They went straight up. That's all I know. And he says to me, were they flying saucers? What's a flying saucer? I didn't know what the heck that was. He read it in the German paper years ago, that these objects were flying around in Canada and foreign countries. And he told me about it. Can you go and look? I says, I don't care, go and look. And Mom was at the telephone. She had phoned my sister. They were going to butcher an animal next day. And Ron Moyer happened to be over there at the house in town here. And she says to my sister, a helicopter had landed in the slough. And I was hollering from the table. I said, no, it wasn't no helicopter. And well, you know how older people are, they don't pay attention to what you're saying. So Ron Moyer, he was out there, and then about a half an hour later, out at the farm, and he says to Dad, let's go out to the slough and have a look and see what there really was out there. And they went, and I went and took the swather, and the swather sang by the house. And drove out where...
Describing in an old interview posted to YouTube, he was talking about what he saw in September of 1974. In the days after, people came from far and wide to see the crop circles. The Ron Morier that Edwin mentioned was an RCMP officer stationed nearby who got the call about a strange sighting. 50 years later, Ron is now retired from the RCMP, but the memories of this investigation are strong. And so he joins us on the line right now from Manitoba. Hello to you, Ron.
Yes, hello.
What's it like to hear that story recounted all these years later?
Yeah, it sure brings back memories for sure. A lot of details that kind of have left my memory since, but hearing Edwin and Brother Leo talking about it, it came flashing back.
Okay, so tell me about the flashback. You were a 27-year-old RCMP constable. What do you remember from that day 50 years ago?
I remember pulling up to the office at the end of my shift on the 1st of September, and Carl Zorn, who's a brother-in-law to Edwin, approached the police car, and Carl lived right next door to the office, and he kind of related the story about what Edwin had seen, and I looked at him, he looked at me, and I went and advised my supervisor what was going on, and from that I went out to the farm and did an investigation. But my memory tells me that I didn't go out until the following morning.
And what did your investigation entail? Like, what did you see, and then how did you go about investigating that as an RCMP officer?
I pulled into Mr. Furr's yard. He's north of Langenburg at the time, north of Mid East, and spoke to him, and he told me the story as he told in his interview. And with him, we went out to the area on his field where he had seen these objects. And I had the camera with me, and I had some vials for taking soil samples, and that's what I did. I took pictures, and they were very plain to see that what he described was as it was. And I also took some grass and dirt samples in vials to send off and get checked out.
And where did that lead you, or what answers were you able to get?
Well, not much for sure. I sent them off to the National Research Center in Ottawa as per our policy. There's firm policy on what we do with stuff like that, and I just followed the policy and mailed them off, and never got anything back, really. Back in those days, it was pretty secretive, all this UFO stuff. It was kind of all under wraps, and I think X-Files was a real strong show on TV at the time, and a lot of people followed that, and it's pretty weird. Nothing like I've ever been involved with before as an investigator.
Yeah. So it didn't lead you anywhere as an investigator, but what did you come to think of what had happened? Did you believe Edwin?
I didn't know Edwin that well. My supervisor knew him quite well. Edwin was a very reliable individual, not prone to telling stories, not prone to wanting a lot of attention. Just a regular salt of the earth fella. And I believe that Edwin, in his mind, saw what he saw, and there was proof out there backing up what he claims he saw. So,
what kind of proof? Tell me more about that.
Well, the proof in just the way he described things, like from especially the circles, they were quite intriguing. How I think somebody described them as kind of like donuts. The grass was all flattened in one direction, and in the middle it was standing. So there was a lot of pressure coming from the rim of whatever these objects were, for sure, to flatten the grass like that. And so there's no way that somebody came into that field to pull a trick on them. because the grass in the field canola was high enough that you would have seen tracks from a vehicle, or even somebody walking through would have left some kind of indication that that they were in there to pull a trick on them.
So what do you think was responsible for it? Like, can I just flat out ask you, like, do you believe that that's from a UFO, that there was something from outer space that hit that field? Like, what do you think?
Well, I'm the kind of guy that I have to see something to believe it, to confirm it in my mind. But I do believe that whatever came into that field came from above and left in the same manner.
I know that you said the investigation didn't really go anywhere and that things were quite secretive back then, but just how seriously at the time did the government treat this? Like, were people sent out? Just how seriously was this taken by the government or by researchers?
Yeah, that kind of bothered me. I was really hoping to hear something from them within the next month or so, because it's big news, and I'm sure Edwin would have liked to have heard something as well, but nothing. But then, as the years went by, things started to trickle out, and there was a gentleman who came down from New York, or came up from New York, that investigates these kind of abnormality sightings and stuff like that, close encounters, UFOs, and they came with a crew and took samples, I'm told, and they did some analysis back at their laboratories and stuff like that. And then you hear things like, yes, the soil and the grass had traces of radioactivity, stuff, and again, I don't have anything on paper that proves that to me or anything like that. So basically, my job was to go to the scene, gather evidence, get a statement, and send it on, and the powers that be are going to take it from there. Okay.
Ron, good to catch up with you today. Thank you.
You bet.
That is Ron Morier, an RCMP officer in Langenburg 50 years ago, when Edwin Furr reported seeing 5 unidentified flying objects in his field. Now, another person who was there on the scene, George Bentley, joins us on the line in Ottawa. He was a reporter for the Leader Post from 1986 to 1998. George, welcome to Blue Sky.
Good afternoon.
Okay, so you felt compelled. You heard we were doing this. You felt compelled to call in. How did you intersect with this story? You were a reporter doing weekend features.
I was a weekender section. This came out. We had another incident. I guess it would have been 1989. So 15 years after Edwin Furr. 3 sightings from the Langenburg, Esterhazy area. One was a group on the 11th of October. One was a bunch of kids skateboarding, and something came up over the horizon, and they saw it, and they reported that. There was a second one on the 13th. That was Gabe and Rose Newmeyer's farm, southwest of Langenburg, and they had one, again, a sighting there. And the third one was on the 18th, I think. It was along Highway 8 between Langenburg and Esterhazy. And it was like the talk of the town. The local community newspaper was doing things on it, and they finally said, we should go out and check it out. It was the days before Twitter and all of those things where news, happened quite rapidly. So we decided to go out, talk to the kids, talk to the Newmeyers, talk to the RCMP officer who was reporting reporting for that area, and also talking to the folks who had the third sighting. Now, 2 of these were in the evening, and the one at the Newmeyer's farm was in broad daylight. And again, for us at least, there was no physical evidence. But at the same time, it was really interesting how the stories all sort of drived you. I don't know if you can talk about mass hysteria or anything like that, but the stories drived, and it's not like, again, bringing back social media, it's not like somebody repeating something you saw on Twitter. So it was turned into quite a piece. We did 2.5 pages of coverage in the Saturday supplement beginning of November, and got a lot of really interesting response.
So now that we're talking to you all these years later, and And so the Langenburg one was 1974. I just want to be clear. So I said you had covered that. You didn't cover that one. You covered all these other ones that happened in the years.
I covered the second outbreak, but everything.
The second outbreak. I like how you call it that. That's so interesting. But all these years later, as you reflect back on that time, like what do you think now? All these years later.
Well, I've always been fascinated with science fiction and space and those sorts of things. It just was a really, really interesting experience. I enjoyed covering the story, enjoyed talking to the people about it, because you could tell they were firmly convinced they had seen something. I hadn't seen anything, but they were firmly convinced, and the stories hung together pretty well.
Do you think we know more now than people did then? I'm just thinking about that Pentagon report that came out this spring. So it's really been in the zeitgeist lately. But that report was supposed to address this long-held belief that the U.S. government is covering up the existence of aliens. And so, I guess we can debate whether or not to believe that report. But just what are your thoughts on, can you apply sort of today's, what we know today to then, or just curious kind of what you're thinking about, especially in light of that Pentagon report?
Well, part of the problem now, though, too, is there's so much background noise. There, again, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, and then rumors spread quite easily. I think there's some nuggets of truth in all of these things, but just a matter of getting by that background noise, getting by that static or ambient noise that, there's something happening. We just still don't know for sure.
Mm-hmm. The mystery. Okay. Good to talk to you today, George. Thanks for calling in. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks very much.
It's George Bentley joining us from Ottawa. I'm Alicia Grabinski. You are listening to Blue Sky, and today we're talking about unidentified flying objects. And if you have a story you'd like to share, you can call us 1-800-716-2221 or email bluesky@cbc.ca. Chris Rutowski gets a lot of calls when people see things in the sky they just can't explain. He is a Canadian science writer. He's written several books, and he's been listening to today's show. Many have called him Canada's top UFO expert. And so, Chris, welcome to Blue Sky.
Glad to be here.
Nice to have you. Nice to see you. So we heard from Farmer Edwin, and we've heard from one of the people who investigated in the days following. What do you recall of this Langenburg episode?
Well, I really regret that I was too young, believe it or not, to have investigated it at the time. But I did investigate a number of similar cases in the area. And I do recall the other cases, 1989, that George Bentley recalls. It was actually in Thanksgiving weekend in 1989 in the Langenburg area. And then there were some in Fillmore, I think a few weeks later. Where people had reported things. But I did go out to Langenburg because I wanted to talk to Edwin. So I've been out there a number of times. I spoke with him on a number of occasions. I have no question of his veracity. I think it's definitely something that occurred. I have seen the report. I've seen the report from the National Research Council about it.
On the Langenburg one specifically?
Specifically the Langenburg one.
Yeah.
The National Research Council of Canada did investigate UFOs and Ron Morier did allude to the fact that there was some protocol and directive for RCMP. Actually, the RCMP investigated UFO cases that were reported for the National Research Council because the National Research Council was interested in meteors and trying to find meteorites on the ground. And so a lot of UFOs turn out to be meteors, and they thought, well, let's try and find them by collecting all the UFO reports, but very, very few of those turned out to be meteors. I think it actually only happened twice in the 30 or 40 year run. But at the same time, you had this body of evidence from people like the RCMP, like Ron Moray, provided this evidence. Unfortunately, the National Research Council was really not interested in that type of thing. They were really more interested in the geology of the rocks that people were finding. So unfortunately, there wasn't a lot done. You also mentioned that these were crop circles. Crop circles actually didn't start happening until well, the late 70s, early 1980s. These were before crop circles. They started happening in England, and there's a whole thing about how some people had claimed that they were hoaxing them and not hoaxing them. They're still being created and found today, believe it or not. But they didn't start until long after Langenburg. But there had been other cases. Duhamel, Alberta, 1967. There were rings that were found in a field, and the case was actually investigated by the Canadian forces at that time. So there has been an interest in this subject, and it's something that people are fascinated with, and rightly so, because in the case of Edwin Furr, I don't know what these things were. There's upside down bowls that were spinning around, and it's unlike that he made up the story himself and was trying to get attention. That's simply not who he was.
How do you know that, though? It's interesting because there's a story from the local newspaper in Victoria that did some reporting after the Mint made a coin for an incident that happened in Duncan, British Columbia, and so one of the people connected to that story came out and said, actually, I need to come clean. It was a party trick. And Dan Hughes says his friends created this spaceship out of wood, candles, and a dry cleaning bag and let it float into the sky in the early hours of New Year's Day in 1970. And he decided that after this coin was made, he needed to come forward and come clean. And so I'm not meaning to discredit Edwin, but at the same time, how do you know? What do you know about Edwin, or what background do you bring to this to know whether or not what he's saying is true?
Well, basically from what Ron Morier had said, that they did do a character check. Edwin was not the type of person to make up stories. Is it possible that he was pranked? I mean, that's possible, but then nobody's come forward. And like you say, only in the one that the coin that was created for the case in Vancouver Island, somebody did come forward long after the event and claim that they had done it. But that was actually also investigated by the RCMP, and at the time, the RCMP did not find any evidence of anybody. In fact, they looked specifically at the possibility of dry cleaner bags and balloons and things like that. And the RCMP investigator did not see that as a possibility. So you have a choice of RCMP or the guy who came forward 50 years after the fact to say that he had done it. Hard to tell. But this was always the problem, that some of these cases are so incredibly fascinating and so remarkable that either they show that there are, craft moving around in our around the earth, or people are making it up, or spots before their eyes, or something like that. It's really just one or the other. And if you're a hardcore debunker, it makes sense to just simply say, well, it's all nonsense. In fact, I had heard there was a hardcore debunker named Philip Klass. I spoke with him, and he had made some phone calls to one of the ministers in Langenburg, who said that he thought that Edwin Furr had just made the whole thing up because he was a practical joker. That's not what we've heard from anybody else. So what's the veracity between that person and other people? I really have no idea.
I want to know a little bit more about you, Chris. What got you interested in this? When you say that you went to Langenburg to do some investigating, who are you doing that research for? I want to know a little bit more about you and what drives you, and what's come of some of the investigating that you've done.
Well, I've been at this since the 1970s. My background is in astronomy, and I have a master's degree in education. I try to bring science to a level that everybody can appreciate and understand a little bit more. And I'd often been asked about UFOs, and I thought the best way to find out exactly what people are seeing is to talk to them and go out to the farm houses and talk with people and meet with them, go to where things are being seen. And over the course of my investigations since 1975 or so, there's something like 20 to 30,000 separate UFO reports that we now have on file, many of which come from government records. The National Research Council had some. RCMP records we've been able to find, Transport Canada. In fact, right now, I continue to get reports from Transport Canada from pilots who are reporting to see UFOs. So I've always had a fascination with what's going on. I want to know, I'm the ultimate doubting Thomas. I want to know what people really are seeing. But when you do get reports from good observers like RCMP pilots, there were pilots who were flying over Hudson Bay, Saskatchewan, a few years ago, and they were flying directly over Saskatchewan. They weren't stopping, but they had reported seeing some unusual objects in the sky above the level of their altitude as they were flying over. And they reported to Transport Canada, and Transport Canada took it quite seriously. When you got cases like that, you tend to think that maybe these are good observers who are seeing things that really are there. If they really are there, well, imagine if a pilot sees something. Is there a problem with the pilot's training? Is he or she imagining things? And if so, that's a serious concern for people who are flying on that plane. Is there a problem with the technology? Is the navigation system or the radar on the fritz? Yeah.
I just want to share just some of this article that came out after the Pentagon report. So this article from CBC says there's no verifiable evidence that any UFO sighting in the U.S. was actually extraterrestrial, according to a new Pentagon report that addresses a long-held belief that the U.S. government is covering up the existence of aliens. What do you think of that?
No, absolutely. There's no proof that aliens are visiting Earth at all. There's stories, and even the Pentagon report that found that there are a lot of cases reported by military personnel, not only in the United States but also in Canada. Those are just stories. They're technically secondhand information, but the fact that they're reported by experienced personnel who should know what they're looking at, they're trained to observe. That suggests that something's going on, but it's true. It's not necessarily proof.
Like something beyond, like a weather event, a drone. I'm not an expert. I'm in a bit over my head here, but most of the time they're able to prove the reason why somebody saw a strange light. At least that's my understanding.
Absolutely. In fact, the vast majority of UFO reports that are filed do have reasonable explanations, and not just stars and planes and planets, but Starlink satellites, the long trains that are seen in the sky now, and drones. There are even kites that have LEDs on them that people are flying. It's so easy to mistake some of these things for something truly mysterious, and that is quite challenging. But when you do, it's sort of like a Sherlock Holmes approach. You try to eliminate all the possibilities to see what things were. And if you eliminate things like planes and stars and planets and all that sort of stuff and drones, then you have to understand, well, what could it have been there? And even by saying that something's unexplained, and a small proportion every year, and in Canada we have somewhere between 500 and 1,000 UFO reports that are filed, even 1% of those every year that are unexplained does not automatically mean aliens. It means that there's more work to be done. We need to get more data, certainly more reports from your listeners, and that's how we, as scientists, study the phenomenon of UFOs. Not necessarily to prove that there's aliens, although a lot of what you're hearing today and what you're seeing on the History Channel and whatever. Our people are saying, oh, yeah, definitely the aliens are here and they're flying through portals and we have crash saucers and bodies of the little green guys and all that sort of stuff. That's all speculation. We have yet to see any tangible evidence. And so there are scientists who are taking this very seriously. I'm part of a group called the Galileo Project, which is setting up observation stations throughout right now the United States, but will come around the world to monitor the skies 24/7, looking for UFOs. I mean, and scientists are they are dedicated to trying to understand what it is that people are seeing. So it's good that this is now happening, and then, but at the same time, you can look back at cases like that of Edwin Fear, that we don't have anything other than his observation and the rings that were found on the ground. But we do have some really good cases out there, and Canada has had a number of really good cases in history. And you combine that with what the scientists are doing right now, and you have quite a comprehensive idea of the phenomenon as it is in Canada.
I'm wondering what these stories might tell us about particular moments in time. Like some of the reading that I did leading up to this show was there was a lot of fear during the Cold War, and so there were things happening at that time that made people feel like they were under threat. And then I think about right now, and have also read about, how quickly misinformation can spread, that we're in a time where there is a growing mistrust in government. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that. How do these stories emerge from particular moments in time?
Well, you raise the Cold War, and that's certainly a very big part of this. In fact, some very notable things that have happened in Saskatchewan can be traced to that. There was a large chunk of something that was found in a farmer's field, not recently, because that's something else, but this was in Wollaston Lake in 1968. Where a large chunk, about 4 feet or 5 feet, was found and turns out to have been a satellite, but it was described as a UFO or piece of a UFO by the government report that was filed on it. Also, in 1960, some historians will remember the case of Francis Gary Powers, who was the U-2 pilot who was shot down over the Soviet Union. Turns out a U-2 actually crashed in Saskatchewan near Creighton. In 1960, and very few people have heard about it. But this just shows that things are happening all the time, or have happened all the time, that the government has taken very, very seriously, and especially during the Cold War, that was the primary focus. Are the Russians doing something? And these days, is it Chinese? Is it some other foreign power? We don't know, but the fact is that people are reporting these things in great numbers, and we have to better understand, get better data, certainly.
I want to take people back to Langenburg, because as you've heard today, this was not an isolated incident in Langenburg with Edwin Furr. Our CBC reporter Shlok Talati spoke to Bill Johnston. He moved to Langenburg in 1980 to work at the paper. He is retired now, but he describes how this was not an isolated event. There were several other unexplained events during his time at the paper.
The first one, UFO seen over Langenburg, that was in 1989. And that involved at least five young teenage boys. They were playing in a park called Centennial Park, which is right across from the school, and actually not too far away from the local RCMP detachment. And they saw a UFO came from the west, I believe it was, or east, I'm sorry, and came at a very high speed and then hovered over top of them. And it stayed there stationary. And they were quite concerned because it wasn't moving. There were red flashing lights. And so a couple of them are so very concerned about what was going on here, didn't know what was going on. A couple of them went running into the high school where there was a badminton course going on, a class, and two of the teachers came out to take a look. And by that time, the UFO had moved off to the west towards the elevators, which we used to have in Langenburg, and it was hovering over there. And they definitely saw something. Everybody confirmed that they definitely saw something. And the teachers said that the boys were so excited, or so nervous actually, that they really felt that they definitely had seen something. And the boys had actually run to their homes to let other people know about it. So it was definitely very interesting that there was that many people saw it. And it wasn't much of a description. They said it was about the size of a car, and it was hovering, same idea, hovering a car over top of they said about maybe 400 feet, maybe at the maximum, over top of where they were. And they were just playing, and when they saw it arrive. And then a couple of days later, two other people within Langenburg area, one was an insurance agent and another person owned her own business. They reported seeing sightings. He saw it on the highway when he was coming to Langenburg, and the woman saw it in the back of her farmyard. And they again saw very, very credible people, and they definitely say they saw something. They don't know what it was, but they definitely saw something, and that seems to be the theme. Nothing is totally confirmed at all, but there's such a strong feeling that something was there that you can't ignore it. You really can't ignore it. And those were the kind of the stories that followed up. One time maybe, second time possible, a little bit more possibility. Third time you really have to say, and each one of them was a very credible person telling the story. Like Edwin, for sure. Like, I've talked to him a couple of times about it, and I said, is there anything that's changed about your story, about what happened? said no, his story is the same that as he told right from the day one to the RCMP. There's no changes whatsoever, and he's very adamant. Knowing Edwin, not really well, but everybody in Langenburg knows everybody else, sort of thing. You have to give full credit to his story, and then there was really no basis or any benefit for him to tell the story. A farmer that really, eventually it turned out to be a bit of a hassle for them because they were deluged by people once the story got out, by people coming from all over the place. I mean, there was a story about an Australian plane, people in an Australian plane flying over, taking it, and then they landed in a nearby field and came to visit to see the site. And so you have to say there's got to be something in there. 50 years of experience in newspapers, I'm the kind of, you just sort of develop I got to see it to believe it attitude. But at the same time, there's that, wow, there's something, got to be something there. And, it's just practicality too. I mean, if you really look at it, who's to say that we are the only ones in this entire whatever? So, you sort of take that to sort of balance against the lack of actual evidence. But I have actually seen two field circles, crop circles, not involved with these in Langenburg, but nearby, one in Spy Hill and one in Rocanville. And just to see them and having no real rational explanation of why they are there, they're very precise. And it's almost impossible for a human being to create that, even with the best of equipment. And they're in random. I mean, they were random fields. So there's really no rational explanation for these. It's
Bill Johnston. He moved to Langenburg in 1980 to work at the paper. I'm speaking today with Chris Rutkowski. Chris, when you hear stories like that, do you find that some sightings tend to spark other sightings?
Yeah, there does seem to be a sort of a cascade effect. If one report is publicized, we will get more reports, but that may be simply because people are coming forward with a little more courage to report what they had seen. In fact, what happens usually is we don't get reports from that haven't happened then. We get reports from a few years ago that people are saying, oh yeah, I did see something a few years ago, but I didn't tell anybody about it. That's typical. The downside is that people, we have human nature. In fact, in Shaunavon, Saskatchewan, in the 1960s, there was a photograph of a UFO that was marketed, and somebody was trying to get some money to sell it to some newspapers and magazines. It turned out that somebody had used a clothespin to hang a flying saucer from a wire on a clothesline, and unfortunately had created this hoax that actually got some attention. So unfortunately, there's that aspect too. This is why we have to be, you have every right to be a little bit doubtful and a little bit hesitant to fully accept everything.
So
but
Chris,
at the same time,
when you hear these stories, what do you do with your interest in this? What do you do when people share these stories with you? What are the next steps?
Well, when somebody reports a sighting, if it's something that can be looked into, personally, I go out. I have colleagues across Canada who, investigate things in British Columbia, Nova Scotia, and so forth. I can't physically go there, but I've been out to Saskatchewan a number of times to investigate cases. It's a matter of talking with people, listening to their story. I won't say that I believe everything I'm told, but at the same time, I don't doubt everything I'm told either. I mean, I understand that people, if they've gone to the trouble to try and contact me, they have a story to tell. And in that case, I want to hear. I'm, in some cases, we're more like counselors or therapists. We want to hear the story so you can better understand and put this in perspective in your own life.
I want to bring in a couple of other people who've got some stories. We don't have a ton of time, but Rhonda in Regina joins us right now. Hi, Rhonda.
Hi, Alicia. I'm just going to take you off speaker. Just one moment.
Okay. While you do that, I'm going to read this email from Al. I'll read an email from Al. 1 second. There's actually a couple famous paintings from the 1500s to 1600s that actually show UFOs painted in the background. We've been visited for longer than we know. I've seen something in the sky above Regina on a cold evening in November, and there's no explaining it as human-made. It's from Al. Okay, Rhonda, go ahead.
So I want to bring in a philosophical slant. Up to this point, I'm not a believer in, UFOs, but of course it's an open question. But if there is another, civilization that keeps flying by, so to speak, I have mused on the fact that perhaps there is no contact being made because our civilization hasn't solved things like war, needless poverty, homelessness, that kind of thing, whereas they have. And perhaps, they're waiting for us to catch up before they make contact with maybe what is to them a more backward civilization. So that's just something I've mused on, maybe for a bit of fun, but also with a deeper thought to that in terms of how our world is.
Rhonda, thanks for calling.
Okay.
That's Rhonda joining us in Regina. Chris, I'd like to thank you too. This has been enlightening, mysterious. I don't know. We did like an X-Files show today. This has been fascinating. Thanks so much for being our guest today.
Thank you.
That is Chris Rutkowski, an author of several books, and many have called him Canada's top UFO expert. I'm Leisha Gravinsky. You are listening to Blue Sky here on CBC Radio 1, 94.1 FM. You can also stream us on the CBC Listen app, and you can find our shows on demand whenever you want. And so you can listen anytime by searching for Blue Sky.